All right, everyone, how are you? Welcome to this week's episode of our podcast. It's called Is Breakfast Included? Thanks for stopping by. On the show this week, Lisa and I sit down with multi-platinum award-winning producer, best known for his work with Dream Theater, Firehouse, and Night Ranger. That's right, I'm talking about David Prater. David stopped by, talked a little bit about his history growing up in Texas, going out to San Francisco to play drums for a very well-known artist, making his way to New York and becoming the producer that he is today. It was a lot of fun catching up with my old friend, and we had some great conversation. He told a lot of great stories. Let's check it out. Tell everyone who you are.
My name is David Prater, originally from Texas, born and raised in Texas, and moved to San Francisco when I was 19, and that's where I got in Santana. And then after then, I went to New York and got a gig with LaBelle, and then remained in New York and on the East Coast for. I left the East Coast in when I was I was going to say 36. No, that's not right. Not just before World War II. No, yeah, when I turned 36. So that was like 19. Hold it a second. That was 1993. 93 is when I came back.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
you were a drummer. You started as a drummer. You were in Santana. What took you from being a drummer to music production, to being a producer?
Well,
That's
it's really funny.
Universal for drummer.
Well, drummers and bass players have a different perspective on song presentation and music because they're so acclimated with timing and the way things fit and symmetry. And so you find a lot of that in production. A lot of Clear Mountain's a bass player. I mean, it goes on a lot, there's a lot of that. So anyway, as far as from drums, I had always, one thing that I did that was very, very, I don't know if people really can understand it, but I listened so intensely. And I just listened so intensely, starting with the first recorded music I heard was Bolero and the 1812 Overture by, I think, Eugene Ormandy, the conductor in Philadelphia. It was on RCA. It was called the Red Seal series. And I was so just blown away. I was like 5 years old, maybe. And just the canons and the way the music told. I mean, I didn't listen. I heard it. Yeah. And if you've ever listened to the old recordings, not the new ones, but the real old ones of 1812 Overture, there's a whole story, and it's sonically. And it affects you emotionally. And so I started when I was real young, and then in Fort Worth, the British invasion was overwhelming. I cannot begin to explain to you how captivating that was to like a 7-8-year-old child. Watching Ed Sullivan. I just remember it being Kennedy was killed on, I think, January 23rd and 63, February 15th. The Beatles came on. So that was like, it just kind of erased all the gloom from the Kennedy assassination. And then you had Herman's Hermits, and then the Rolling Stones, and oh my God, the Dave Clark Five, So what happened is I got to where I was listening so intently to the melodies and Lennon and all the Beatles, George, Ringo, and John, not so much Ringo, but the three of them, because George was equally as important as John and Paul. So that got me into songs. And then from there, when I started playing professionally in bands 5 nights a week, 4 or 5 sets a night, you're playing so many different types of music. This is in the 70s when, up until Reagan came in, there was a pretty active club scene throughout the United States to where you could play at a Holiday Inn or a steak and ale kind of place. And, you could make $200, $300 a week, $350 a week, depending on how many guys in the band. You could support yourself. And so you're playing music constantly. You're learning it. You're learning the lyrics. Then you find out, I think I can sing pretty good. So then now you're singing and now you're understanding melody. So that was a long-winded answer, but that's pretty much that's how. And when it got into production, all I did is I applied my understanding for song structure and started. No, do it the other way. That's a lot better. That it kind of got to where I was the guy that had the most formed opinions about what sounded best and what resonated emotionally.
Yeah.
Um, so and from there, I found out when I started recording myself on 4 tracks, probably starting when I was 19, 20. And then I just found I was really good at putting stuff together. And other people had no clue. And even when equipment got better, a lot of those people never got a clue. You think, well, it's so much easier now, cut and paste. No, didn't happen. So anyway, that's how it started, and it really got going. I was already recording. I recorded my first album for Columbia when I was, when I was 20. That's right. It was with Nona Hendrix, and we did that, and then we went on tour opening for Peter Gabriel a few months later. But I remember. Um, I was already recording before we went to England to open for Peter Gabriel. I recorded for Arista Records, so I was already recording with Arista, Columbia, and here I was. I wasn't even 21 years old, so I started really young, and that kept going until I got back. I lived in. I don't know if I told you. I lived in Germany for a year at the height of the Cold War in Frankfurt, Germany.
Wow.
And so when I got back, that's when I started working, uh, for record companies. There was SBK was one, A&M. Then I got my first gig co-producing for A&M Records, a guy named Glenn Burtnick, who really, he's a legend in New Jersey. You know about Glenn, don't you, Bernie?
I'm not familiar with him.
Well, yeah, Asbury Park. It's a shore thing,
Uh-huh.
and Jersey City isn't really the shore.
No.
So anyway, just look him up. It won't take you long. And he was the original McCartney in Beatlemania. So, he brought that kind of musical wherewithal and sensibility into his second solo record, and he asked me to co-produce it. So that's when I got my first major label production credit and actually got paid.
Nice.
And then by that time I had my own 12-track Akai 1214. I started with the 1212 and then I went to the 1214, which is a little bit more professional grade. And so I was already doing really good sounding demos for people and making a living doing that. And, I'd get, I don't know, maybe $1,000 a song to do somebody's record that they could release themselves, or I'd do a session for, I'd usually just quote them like a flat rate. And I was constantly working, just constantly working. And so that after I did that album in 87 with Glenn Burtnick for A&M, then I just strong-armed my way into being the producer of record. In other words, it was just me. I wasn't sharing credit with anybody for Epic. And then when you start working with Epic Records, that's Sony, CBS, Columbia, the whole shooting match. And it was a band called Diving for Pearls, and that was a real. That was a high profile gig at that time in the New York area. And that was for Epic. And then a year later, I walked into Michael Kaplan's office and I said, God damn it, Mike, how long is it going to take for me to get a gig doing a real album? I'm ready. I got all the context. I got a great engineer. And he said, okay, go shut the door. You didn't hear me tell you this. And he said, there's this band in North Carolina. And eventually they became known as Firehouse. And when he said, I want you to go down. They're playing this weekend. And that was Thursday. I think I flew out the next morning. They picked me up. I had to take 3 turboprops to get down there, like Raleigh, Durham or something. Went and saw them play, flew back. And the next week they were staying in my house and we were doing pre-production. So, and that was for Epic. And then that record, once I finished it, we did that in spring of 90. That was in the spring of 90. Yeah. And by that Christmas, it came out like 6 months later. I think I finished it sometime like in April or May. And we did that at Bear Tracks in upstate New York. And then one morning I looked in there in Billboard. It used to come to the streets on Thursday. We in the industry, we got them on Tuesdays. And I looked in there and it was already Love of a Lifetime was the top 5 single, not on rock tracks or heat seekers or college radio. That was on the big charts. That was Garth Brooks, Mariah Carey, Whitney Houston, Boyz II Men, Firehouse, Love of a Lifetime.
At what point did you realize that was where it was headed?
Until then, I really didn't have an idea.
You didn't know as you were working on it?
No, there was a guy, Lisa, as it turns out, by that point, word had already gotten out in the street that there's this guy named David Prater, and he's really intense. He plays all the instruments, and his records sound good, and they sound different. Mm-hmm. And so, I was kind of they're always looking for a new face, a new personality, And in New Jersey, there wasn't really anybody at that point that was just hitting that hard, on all ticking the box, all the right boxes. So anyway, what happened is I remember talking to Derek Oliver, and he said he's British, and he was from A&R at Atlantic at Coeast West. And he said, David, this record it's really going to do great. I mean, it's going to do very well. I said, what are you talking about? Because I was already working. Mm-hmm. I was already trying to pick up other gigs, and I had no idea that it was doing as well as it was. And it was doing really well. I mean, God.
It sure was.
I never watched television, so I'd never heard him on MTV. I'd never heard him on the radio, none of that stuff. Because I just lived, generally speaking, once I'm finished with the record, I put it out of my mind. Unless I'm actively involved in doing radio and maybe sitting down for things like this, but in a different era.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, I didn't know that it was doing that good until Christmas. And I got my first big royalty check, and it was like, well, I can get used to this. And then Derek Oliver became good friends, and I continued to do some work that was, it was noteworthy. And as it turns out, do you remember Gentle Giant, Bernie?
Gentle Giant, I don't.
Oh, God. What am I going to do with you kids? I mean, there would not be progressive rock if it wasn't for Gentle Giant and Yes. Gentle Giant was the most, that was one of Frank Zappa said that's one of his favorite bands. Just remarkable musicianship. And the lead singer of that was a guy named Derek Shulman. Derek became probably the most successful A&R guy from the 80s and the 90s into the 2000s. Now, he signed Pantera. The list of groups, Tears for Fears, AC/DC, Bad Guy, it goes on and on. And when I was in a band on Arista called Baby Grand, which later became the Hooters, we did shows with him. And so I'd already played with Derek Shulman before he became the president of A&R at these Polygram, Mercury, Atlantic. So he knew who I was, and I certainly knew who he was. And he signed this band called Dream Theater. but actually, he didn't sign them. He was looking at them until I got involved. That's when it said, okay, we're signing them and you're going to do the record. And that was for Dream Theater. That was for, they had done a previous record in '89 for a small label called Mechanic Records, and it didn't do well. It was just, they weren't ready. And they had a great producer, Terry
Terry
Day.
Date, yeah.
Yeah, he's great. And so anyway, I went and met him and I said, I don't want to do this. These guys are really unpleasant. They had a certain kind of air that I identified with Long Island at the time. And I just thought, wow, these guys, I've worked with enough bands like this to where I don't think they're going to, I don't think that they're going to be open. As a matter of fact, I said, if I have some ideas about things musically in production, am I correct in hearing you that you don't want any of that? And Portnoy said, that's right. And I looked at Derek and I said, well, listen, we need to go ahead and get back. We're going to hit traffic at the Midtown Tunnel. And, there's nothing more to talk about. These guys don't want me here. I don't want to be here. And I said, I'm not interested. And he called me back like maybe a month later. And he said, David, we're signing the band and you're going to produce the record. And that's all there is to it. And I thought, okay, when one of the top guys in A&R calls the guy and says you're going to produce the record, and you don't have anything else going on, you probably should do it.
Yeah.
And so I did. So is that a good answer? Is this telling you anything?
Yeah. What was it like working with Portnoy and Jeff Petrucci and those guys when they were they were still young guys and full of piss and vinegar,
Well, there were two Kevins in the band. There was one, Kevin Moore, the keyboardist, and then there was Kevin Labrie. So eventually that's how he became James Labrie, because his middle name was Kevin. Yeah. James Kevin Labrie. Yeah. And so that's how they differentiated the two Kevins. And so I got along with James, who was Kevin at the time. We got along great. He was a singer from Canada, and
this was his first album with them, correct?
I beg your pardon?
This was his first album with them.
That's right. And he was extraordinary. I mean, he was singing all these parts in different time signatures and had no background in it. Was just doing an amazing job. And the record label didn't like his singing. And I thought, would you guys shut up? I'm a singer. I'll tell you if this guy can sing. And this guy can sing, and he's great, and I can work with him. So we got along great. Petrucci and I were very close. We used to be good friends. And then Michael, he had a different agenda. I mean, and I think it's very easy to understand that Michael was about brand Portnoy. I mean, he had a specific vision, not unlike, there's a combination of Buddy Rich and Neil Portnoy, kind of a hot dog, and at the same time, integral to the presentation of the music. And so, but it got to the point to where I was listening to what he was doing, and by and large, it was fine. But at that point, this is 1991. We started it September 15th, 91, and I finished on December 11th. I remember that. And back then, to do a record from nose to tail, it took 3 months, because it took pre-production. Then you had to do the basic tracks, then you had to do the overdubs, then you had to do the lead vocals, and then you had to do the vocal composites, then you had to do all the backing vocals, then you needed to take a break. So then you had all the guitar solos and all the keyboard solos. So it was just an assembly, like Ford Motors. So anyway, but the thing was, I was very efficient. I never had anybody until the very end. There was one instance to where I had to bring somebody in to mix for me, because I left. I was gone. And so when I mixed a record, it wasn't mixed by Chris Lord-Alge for radio or Andy Wallace or Claire Mountain. I mean, I mixed the singles. I did all the my engineer, Doug Oberkirker, who I've always got to give credit for because he was just superb. He was like my master sergeant. It was like, okay, you get in there and tell those bastards that they better get this done. I got to get into the city. I'm going to be back about 6. Let's go out to eat and then we'll finish, And I knew that he would take care of everything in my absence. And he was just superb. So we mixed a song a day. So we started mixing like the first on the Dream Theater, Images and Words, in the first week of December. And I always mix a song a day. So there's 8 songs, took 8 days. It didn't take 6 weeks.
Yeah.
So, but as far as Mike, uh, uh, you know, uh, John and I could talk about anything. We laughed and talked shit, and it was just fun. And he was silly. And he was like, he's an Italian. He's a warm-hearted guy. He's a tender-hearted guy. Kevin Moore was very intellectual, and him and Mike were they didn't want anything to do with me. So I said, well, I love you too. And so I remember at one point I just made a suggestion, could you not crash there and wait until the beginning of the next measure? And it's like, no. I said, okay, all right, time out. And so a day or 2 later, we had a conversation, and I said, listen, Mike, there are things that you're doing that I'm not understanding why you're doing them, but it's obvious you're committed to all of those performances and the way that you've devised your arrangement with respect to drums. So here's what I suggest that we do. You play whatever you want to play. I'm going to record it, and then I'm going to make it work to the best of my ability by the time the record is delivered to the record company and mixed, all of that. Mm-hmm. And because I said, I'm not into compromising. I would rather it be all your way, and at least there is a vision as opposed to not really your way and not really my way. I mean, that's not going to work. And so that's how we did it. And it worked out fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
But and John Mayong, he if you know anything about him, he's Korean, and Koreans generally, and I'm not being, this isn't meant as any sort of a racial or ethnic slur, but they're kind of stoic. They don't just chat a lot, by and large. And he's very strong mind. I mean, he had a will when he played. It was just, there was a lot of attack when he went at the instrument. I admired him. I have tremendous respect for John, but he wasn't chatty, not at all. Not at all. Whereas chatty. John and I would, we'd fart and, everything that guys are supposed to laugh at each other for. Is this getting anywhere? Am I telling you?
Yeah, no. So when Images and Words was done, I mean, this is a progressive album. Songs 6-7 minutes long. And did you know it was going to be? Did you have any feeling that it was going to be as commercially successful as it was? Because at the time, those albums were not commercially successful.
I never cared about that.
Yeah.
I just thought when I first heard them at their rehearsal, I thought, wow, this is, it wasn't a challenge for me because I had been in progressive bands. I was in Nectar, which was a contemporary of Yes and Genesis. I mean, I knew how to play in 5, 7, 11, do all of it.
Yeah.
And so it was like, okay, it's not like I'm telling you, hey, can you guys mix it up something? No, it was already all there. They had all the ingredients. So here's my take on Dream Theater. I knew that I would probably never get an opportunity to work with a group that had as many virtuosos within its membership. There's 5 guys, each guy on their instrument. Could be on the cover of, their prospective magazines that catered to that fan base. And so I said, okay, you're the guy everybody's talking about. And, your marquee value was starting to rise. I'd already done the record for A&M. I'd done the record for Epic, Diving for Pearls. And those were very popular in the New York metropolitan area because things were much more tribal. I mean, if you're in the New York area, like North Jersey, Central Jersey, Manhattan, Brooklyn, Staten Island, Queens, and then you get into upstate and then Long Island, everybody kind of knew everybody. Oh, I know your group. Oh, you guys did that record for Warner's or whatnot. So I knew that this was going to be a record that I don't know how to explain it, but when I was doing it, I felt that my feet didn't even touch the ground. There was something that literally came, it just arrived. And I had this premonition that this was going to be very important, but that was all I could tell you. And I knew that I've always kind of had this belief about, it's almost what they call remote viewing, but being able to see things before they happen, a certain amount of precognition. And so I just knew that I was going to, I had a vision what I was going to do with this record based upon what they gave me to work with. And there was no way I was going to fail. And I didn't. I mean, I delivered it like clockwork. There was a hiccup in there for about 3 weeks when Kevin Moore wanted to do his keyboard overdubs. And, I begrudgingly let him indulge himself. And what should have taken 3 or 4 days took 21. So I lost some productivity there, or else I could have brought it in even earlier and cheaper. But the point that I'm making is that, that came to a head. And then I told him, I said, that's it. We're wiping the tracks. We're starting from scratch. You're done with what you want to do. You had your chance and you dropped the ball. So there were some voicings that he was using. There's a certain way that there is a melody within a chord sequence. And it's not just, okay, if you're playing A minor into G and the F sharp, and if you do all that, I mean, as long as you're playing those chords, you can play it anywhere on the keyboard, and it's the same thing. No, it's not. There are notes that there's ways that if you watch Rick Beato, he will talk about that a lot. And so it got to the point to where all of the beautiful chord voicings that he had originally played, he changed over those 3 weeks, and it sucked. And I said, man, there's no way I'm going to work with this. And so we started over. And so that caused a lot of between Michael and between Michael Portnoy and Kevin Moore. There was this simmering kind of resentment. It's like, what else is new? I get that anyway. I got that with every record with somebody. Somebody's, thinking I'm not living up to what their vision is or whatnot. And that's not my job. My job is to make the record company happy and try and make the best record I can. And there's a way that you can do it, but you got to have a certain type of personality to produce a group of individuals with very different personalities and agendas, and then deal with an A&R department in a record company with very different personalities and agendas, and then dealing with the executives and the promotion people. It's kind of like being a head coach,
Yeah.
and coming in and trying to, bring the Eagles into the playoffs or something. So, am I doing? Is this doing anything for you,
You're
Lisa?
doing it. This is great.
Is it good stuff? Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Do you think your production style has changed over the years?
Oh yeah,
Definitely.
I think it's become. Well, first of all, I was considered, the Marquis de Sade, the Satan of samples, And the reason we used samples back then is because we didn't have computers. And so, Michael Portnoy was what's really stupid is I had done demos for the band for Atlantic. I had done a full-blown, I did one, two. Yeah, I did Metropolis. I did Take the Time and Forever. That's right. I did 3 songs for them, and I used the same sample on the demos, and nobody complained about it. They thought they sounded great, and the record company signed the band based upon those demos, and they eventually released them. And I don't think I got any money for it. I don't even know if I got credit. But that's the kind of crap that happens in those situations. So it's not like they didn't know what kind of tools that I was using and was possibly going to use. And then after I did the record and used pretty much those same samples for the snare and the kick drum, it was like, oh, it was considered the worst thing that could possibly happen. Look what he did to my sound, that bastard. And he used the same sounds on Firehouse. I said, yeah, the first album and the second album, and also did that in '89 for Diving for Pearls. I don't want to hear it. Andy Wallace, all those guys, they have samples they use. Bob Clearmountain, he has his favorite samples. Chris Lord Alge. Oh, but lo and behold, that racist bigot Nazi from Texas, David Prater. Oh, I'm going after him. And I just thought, God, how much more petty can it get? I mean, it's kind of like the guy won't take yes for an answer.
Yeah.
I made you your most commercially successful record, still considered by many to be the best record you've ever done. And he absolutely cannot say enough bad about the record. And what does that tell you?
Yeah. Yeah.
The rest of the guys, I don't think feel that way. I think that, Kevin LeBrie and John, I mean, they accept it on it's like, yeah, it's a great album. They're more interested in what they're doing now, and that's the way it should be.
I think
But
Petrucci's always said that album put them on the map,
It did. It did. And that's what I wish that we were still friends, but there's just too much politically in the way.
Yeah.
But I will. I genuinely like all of the guys, given when they're not trying to live up to some sort of an agenda or a opinion. It's something I don't. I know that now with the magazines. Michael has an sprawling fan base and database. Very, very brand specific.
I think he just returned back to the band after
He did
a number of years of being gone.
I think their record may have just come out
last week.
This week.
Last week, this week. Yeah, last week I think.
And that's a good thing, because quite honestly, I think progressive rock, in his absence from the band, because they were really the torchbearers. There was a lot of bands that are really good. Symphony X was a great band. There's just a buttload of them out there.
Yeah.
But there was something special about Dream Theater, and when he got booted from the band, I predicted that. I said there was a book that came out, and I was asked to write a piece about the making of the record and stuff. And I said, don't be surprised if this happens, because they're not too happy with his behavior at this point. And not long after that, they let him go. And it was for 10 years at least. That had to really frustrate the living shit out of the guys in the band, because they had done this long U.S., may have been a world tour for all I know, with Iron Maiden. Remember that?
Yeah.
And they were slated to do their first arena tour as a headline. And Mike said, no, I need to take a break. No, that's what I read in the magazines. And the band was like, wait a minute. You want to take a break because you've been doing all these different projects and flying around and, burning the candle, but we haven't. We're Dream Theater, and this is our baby, and we're all ready to go on tour and stay on tour. And he was like, I'm not. I need a break. And so at that point, it got ugly. And so they stopped it. And that was, in my opinion, that was self-inflicted. So there.
around the early 90s when grunge started taking a big chunk of everyone's cash, you decided to make a change and got out of it.
Oh, yeah.
What did you do after that, and why did you walk away from it?
Well, because it's kind of like when a new administration comes into the White House, it doesn't matter how successful the previous one was for 8 years. They don't want anything to do with you. Get these assholes out of here.
Yeah.
And so I was always going to be, even though Dream Theater was, that was still considered a hair band. Look at their first album cover, a lot of hair.
Yeah.
you know, and also Firehouse, I think, that really kind of sullied things. And so for me to go from where I was, I could have done it, but I knew that the days of massive rock tours and radio and singles, I knew that it was over. I knew it. As a matter of fact, Glenn Burtnick told me he had a conversation one day when he was in Midtown. There was between 51st and 52nd Streets on 7th Avenue, you had 52 West 51st was Black Rock. That was CBS. And you could open your window and yell at your friend across the street at Atlantic. So you would run into people all the time, And so Glenn, being from New Jersey, and John being from New Jersey, and John and Glenn were good friends, and John liked the album I did for Glenn as the co-producer on Heroes and Zeros. So they started talking. And John, and I remember Glenn came back, and he came by my house in New Jersey to pick up something to mix or pick up a guitar or something. I can't remember. And he said, "Man, you got a minute?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "I just had this conversation with John Bon Jovi, and it has freaked me out." I said, "What's up?" And he said, "All the labels are dropping everybody. Cinderella, Warren, Rap, Giant. It didn't matter who it was. We're done with you guys. Okay? Your time has come. You and enjoyed a good 12, 13 years of runaway success. And now grunge was coming in, and the grunge people a band like Firehouse was the antithesis of Alice in Chains. Even though I loved that album Dirt, I thought, God, I'd love to have produced that. No, they already had, the Brendan O'Briens, the Dave Jordans, the whatever the guy's name that did the Soundgarden stuff. Brower or Braun. I can't remember. Michael Braun. So anyway, and Bob Rock and some of those guys. I just knew that I didn't have any inroads. I had a manager at that time, but I had really avoided. Back then, you used to have managers that managed producers, and there was this whole way that they grifted money from record companies and budgets and put it in their pockets. And I just stayed away from it. I didn't want anything to do with it. I said, that's bullshit. And it wasn't fair to the artists. And so as a result, I wasn't really playing ball with the guys in LA. And the last album I did for Epic was in 92. I did Stephen Pearcy's band Arcade. And by that point, it was right after the Rodney King riots. And so you had hip hop and Public Enemy and NWA, and you had all of this stuff happening, which I thought was pretty exciting because it wasn't really hip hop at that point. It was rap. It was hardcore rap with like boom, boom, boom. So it was hard beats. It was really kind of like when you heard them playing in an arena, it was just this real tough beat with a little bit of bass synthesizer and a real hard drum pattern. And it was powerful. It wasn't a bunch of stuff that sounded like mice on a tin roof. So you had that happening, and they're starting to sell out big venues, and there's just all this controversy and swagger. So that was hip hop. Then you had grunge coming in, and you had heroin, and these guys were dark. And I just thought, I've had a pretty good run. At least I made a contribution. At least I think I will be known for a few things that I did. And I was at that point, I was 36. I was 36. I turned 36 in Los Angeles in 92. And so I said, I'm going to take a break. I've been doing this for 18 years. And I just knew that, MTV wasn't even playing videos really anymore. It was already starting to turn into MTV Raps. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah.
And you got to understand something. I'd appreciate it if you would, is that I remember I left Texas because I couldn't stand the country scene. That was back when the Eagles were taking it easy. And I was like, oh, that is not the kind of gig you want if you're a drummer, a rock drummer. I wanted to be in Deep Purple doing, Machine Head or something. So anyway, rock music by 75, 76 had gotten so candy ass. You had yacht rock, and then you had Styx and an REO Speedwagon, and it was like all of these guys, with shirts tied around their waist, showing little stomach, and then satin, and it was just, it's like, and it was just like watching a bunch of poodles on stage. And so then the Sex Pistols. So I saw punk. I was at the Marquee in 77 with Tom Robinson headlining there. And I said, man, this is fucking exciting. The audience was spitting at the performers, and the performers were spitting back at them. And I was like, God, this is outrageous. These people are pissed, and so am I. I don't like that shit either. And so I thought I understood exactly what happens when there is a sea change, or there was what they would call a watershed moment. And so I'd already seen that with punk. And then I'd seen that when punk kind of petered out, and then the hair band thing started happening big. And then you had new wave come in, the Thompson Twins, Duran Duran, And so I had seen 3 or 4 changing of the guards, and now here's the latest one. Yeah. Grunge is coming in, the records that I was doing with the other bands, even though I could have done every one of those grunge records and done a great job, wasn't going to happen. Mm. And then hip hop just, it just became this juggernaut.
Yeah.
And so I had already seen the writing on the wall before. It's kind of like, you ever gone to a job, before you walk in there, they don't want to hear anything that you have to say, but you were next on, the meeting. You were the 1 o'clock, and they just had their 12:30. They probably already hired somebody, and you're in there trying to say, "Oh, I'm going to do a great job. I'd love to manage this company." Okay, well, we'll get back to you. All right, let's. So that's kind of where you said, what did you do and why did you do it? I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to try and get healthy. And then I moved to Texas, and all of that was really, had I had it to do again, I would have done things completely different. It was disastrous. And I started playing a lot of golf again because I was kind of like Tiger Woods when I was a kid. I went to the junior amateur in Texas when I was 13. So I was beating grown men in club championships when I was in the 8th grade. So once I got into music, I had to pick up a club for 20 years. And I wanted to play again. I wanted to, and the other thing too is I was still, as a drummer, one of the things that made me stop playing was because of my hearing. Hearing was huge that was a huge consideration for me, because in the studio I didn't have to abuse my body and my hearing, and my mind. It has a, just because you're subjected to high volume levels and a lot of radiation, microwave radiation and electromagnetic energy in the studio. I don't know if you guys know that, but there is a lot of bad shit electronically generated in there. And, you need a break from it. You just can't stay in there for 40 years and physically thrive unless you have a pretty healthy lifestyle.
I met you in Texas, and I think you were working with Texas Hippie Coalition. I remember just hearing rumbles about
I
David Prater
think
working
I
with them.
met you
We met at Club
before there.
Indigo.
Yes, that's where
We
it
met
was.
at Club
That's right.
Indigo, and Rich said our producer's coming out to see this show. It was like a Thursday night. They were just you wanted to see him play live, and they had worked some material, and I was
Well,
stoked
I had
because
already actually recorded 3 songs with him. I'd never seen him play live. Yeah, that's
yeah.
right. I wanted to see him.
And I was pretty stoked because I think I told you that night, like as a kid, you play guitar, you listen to the albums, and I think I told you I was fanboying on you. I said, when I was younger, I always said when my band gets signed, I want 2 producers, either David Prater or Terry Day, which
Mm-hmm.
ironically you both did Dream Theater, but
Mm-hmm.
you were very flattered. But you and I remember you took the time to talk to me all night.
Mm-hmm.
Even well after the club closed. We just sat there shooting the shit. You
And I
told me
wasn't doing a bunch of coke either, so don't.
No. We just sat there. You had a drink in your hand, and we were just
Well,
talking.
you were a student. You had some legitimate questions, and you were enthusiastic, and I love talking to people like that.
Yeah, and you were working with THC, was Texas Hippie Coalition, and who've gone on to be somewhat successful. I think
they have been very successful, but in ways that are hard to qualify. They. I mean, you know how bands are nowadays. They sell barbecue sauce and crotchless panties and shot glasses, and so they Richard Anderson, Big Daddy, has really marketed himself and his brand and done well with it.
Yeah.
To the point to where sometimes they play a lot of biker festivals, and that is a very specific outreach.
Yeah.
As far as, being a rock band and doing that kind of thing, as opposed to, doing theaters and stadiums and big tours and whatnot.
So you're working with Consider the Source. You sent me the CD.
Yes.
I listened to it. I actually downloaded it on my phone. What is it with you and progressive bands, man? They're amazing.
Well, let me just say this, and I hope that this comes through as importantly as it resonates with me, and that is progressive. The label progressive rock is the most open, embracing of all styles and skills of all the styles of music. If you're talking about grunge, well, there's a very specific thing they're going to do. If you're looking at hair bands, and especially now with Nashville, there are very rigid parameters: pickup trucks, blue jeans, 6-packs. There are certain things that got to be in the songs. There's certain types of kind of lifestyle positioning and branding, and certain things are okay to do, and certain things aren't. And in progressive, for God forbid, you could actually have keyboards in it. Imagine that nowadays, huh? Yeah. So anyway, so the way that the vocals, the way each instrument can be envisioned within the context of progressive, it's very, very imaginative, and it's very creative. And even though there's all sorts of wild music out there, and there's a lot of great music out there, and I hear like for instance, a band like Porcupine Tree, which probably wouldn't have even started if it weren't for Dream Theater, because a lot of those bands kind of got their, they were young when Images and Words came out. And so for Consider the Source being a progressive band and approaching it with the Central Asian influence, that's something that there wasn't anybody out there doing what those guys are doing. And when I saw them play, I personally think, and especially right now with what's going on, and we all know what that is, but the Europe and Central Asia and Eastern Europe, you really have to look beyond the borders of the United States and our hegemony to be able to find new audiences, because they're still eager to embrace American musicians or American music and so on. And in the United States, it's kind of jaded. I mean, things are so unpleasant here. Canada was I spent a little time in Canada, and that was kind of like a frontier, but it's a very small market. I mean, is there even 30 million people in that country? It's not a lot. So I wanted, when I heard what they were doing on a coming attraction for this place called Intrinsic in Montrose, Colorado, that was a live music venue, I saw this, and I don't know if I told you this, but I thought there was something wrong with the video, because there was this music and these guys were playing so fast. I thought it looks like a Buster Keaton movie, like where everybody's kind of doing like that. And then I went, wait a minute, no, it's not. The sync was a little off with the sound in the video, but those guys are doing that. And I said, I want to see this. And I made sure when they came there on November 20th, 1990. I had a hip replaced. My first one, I had both of them done eventually, but I was doing a conference at the NAMM show in January of 20. Well, this was the fall of 19, so we were like 2 months out. So I didn't know if I was going to be able to go there and stand up and watch these guys play. Well, as it turns out, I stood up for 4 hours and didn't even bother me. And I made sure I got there early and met the guys for sound check, introduced myself. They said, no way, you didn't produce Dream Theater. And then I sang Pull Me Under. And they went, holy shit, go get John. That was the bass player. Because, he really liked Images and Words. As it turns out, that was their favorite band. And then when I started talking to them, then I found out that they were heavily influenced by Return to Forever with Chick Corea and the Mahavishnu Orchestra. And I said, well, that's like my mother's milk. I mean, that's what I grew up on, man. That was the shit. When I was in Santana, he had just finished his phase with John McLaughlin, so I was heavily into fusion as a drummer. So anyway, we started talking, and after the gig, I said, I want to do a record. I think we should talk about it at least. And it took me about a year to kind of win their enthusiasm. Then we got together, and then COVID happened, and that was just a disaster. But I drove out from Montrose to Asheville, North Carolina, which takes at least 2-3 days. It's well over 2,000 miles. And anyway, we recorded in a little house there, and we recorded in August of 20. And so by that point, I was already 6 months into the band. So it was almost 5 years until the record came out. Because I could only find time, with the people that I needed to have around to work on the material. It seemed like it was every 6 to 8 months to where I could actually find the time and get to where I needed to be to do things. And so finally I finished it in Denton with a guy named Rick Greenwood. And he turned out to be a real godsend, because there's 5 songs on the record. The record's little over 42 minutes long. And there's over 100 tracks on each song for a 3-piece band. I mean, that's ridiculous. So the amount of file management that you had to do within Pro Tools to get this thing to where it even sounded like anything, it took an enormous amount of man hours and and I'm so proud of it. I can't begin to tell you. I mean, I get better reviews for this than I got for Dream Theater. People at least now, nobody can say, I hadn't heard any. Everybody's doing the same old shit. Nobody's doing it. And I mean, this is real different. I'm talking about Consider the Source and the way the Gabe plays to where half the time you can't tell if it's a keyboard or a woman's voice or what it is.
Yeah.
So anyway, so you listened to it in headphones?
I did. I listened to it with the headphones, and it sounds gret, man. It's all over the place.
Yeah, the thing is, too, you can't say, like with a lot of bands, there's a lot of these offshoot bands in Europe that sound like what I was doing back in the early 90s with Dream Theater. And I just can't get that excited about it. I mean, come on, dude, try something. And but nobody can say that if you've heard the first song, you've heard all the songs on the record. No, there's 5 songs and they're all completely different one to the next.
Yeah, they're all different moods.
Yeah. And did you, let me ask you this. Did you miss the presence of an actual vocalist?
No, I dig that kind of shit, man.
See, that was my point, because and I'll just say, and then you can tell me to shut up, but I have a certain template before I'll get involved with the band. There's 2 types of things. Either you can do something, somebody says, well, I give you $10,000. I want to make a great record of all I've wanted to do it all my life. Half the time it's a vanity record. The only people going to hear it are his family, the extended family, the girlfriends, maybe the local heroes, and that's it. And we refer to it as a vanity project. Second one is, okay, I like to get involved with bands that have management to where they can perform live. They do perform live. They tour and have a established fan base. And so with them, they checked all the boxes, and they had management. They didn't have a label, but I wasn't really worried because what is a label anymore, for crying out loud? I mean, what's Duran Duran's label?
BMG. I think it's BMG.
I think they're distributed by BMG, but
well, who is that anymore?
Yeah, Warner,
it's BMG, Universal, or
yeah.
But anyway, you know the point that I'm making. It's so
TikTok is the label.
Well, I mean, so TikTok is so they're actually still allowed in the United States. I mean, I see stuff up, but I don't actually know what. At one point, they were talking about canceling it.
It was. I think they got rid of it and it came back, but
who knows? But that's for kids, man. I'm sorry. Most of the people that are movers and shakers, they have some sort of a YouTube presence, their own channel. Rick Beato's doing a fantastic job with getting people enthused about making music again and not really being so obsessed with becoming rich, which is the only way that you'll become rich is by not trying to be. So anyway, but anything else?
David, we want to thank you, man. I know we've been trying to do this for a minute, but thank you so much.
Thank you.
You really entertained us with your stories, and our podcast is called "Is Breakfast Included?" And if we were having breakfast, what would you have?
Well, that's pretty easy. I can almost eat an indefinite amount of French toast, heavy on the egg. So I love French toast, and I love eggs over medium with a side of hash browns and some disgustingly thick, salty bacon.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
You
That
fit
sounds
right in with
great.
us.
That sounds good.
Health food.
Yeah. Perfect.
Thank you, man. It's been a pleasure having you on. Right on. David Prater. Interesting guy, huh? You can find out more about David and everything he's doing on his Facebook page, David Prater Producer. Go check it out, see what he's up to. While you're at it, check out his discography. Look what he's worked on, man. He has an amazing resume, and you need to check it out. And while you're online, make sure you check out isbreakfast.com. You can follow us on both Facebook and Instagram there. Check out our YouTube page. Make sure you become a subscriber if you're not already one. Rate and review our show on Apple Podcasts. And hey, since you've made it that far, buy a shirt. Pick up a shirt. All right, guys, I am done. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next week.